Hi, everybody. I'm John. This is The Record Shelf. And today we're going to begin the album Bad Company, the debut album for the band Bad Company. It was formed back in 1973, and this was their debut album when it came out in 1974. Now, Bad Company consisted of Paul Rodgers, the incredible lead vocalist for the band, and also his former bandmate from the band Free, Simon Kirk, the drummer. And then former Mott the Hoople guitar player Mick Ralphs came in, and the ex-King Crimson bass player Boz Burrell came in. And they brought with them the incredible music they had from both of those bands, all of those bands, Free, Mott the Hoople, and King Crimson. And brought all that talent and experience into this band, this very first, this Bad Company had a sound that was just plain rock music. Not a lot of studio effects, not a lot of vocal layerings. They really kept it very clean. In fact, one thing you'll notice about Bad Company, they sound kind of like Free a little bit. That's because their lead singer was the lead singer and their drummer was the drummer. But they just kept this very clean rock sound. Now, Bad Company was just a plain great rock band. They weren't necessarily hard rock. There was no such thing as metal in those days. They weren't a top 40 pop band. They were just rock music. When you think of just rock music, this is it. Just plain rock and roll. A lot of it blues-based, because that's really where rockin' was when it came into the 70s. A lot of blues-based rock and roll. And you'll find that sort of sounded a lot of the stuff. Zeppelin, a lot of other bands in the early 70s playing that kind of rock and roll. Blues was still very much a part of the rock scene, which was pretty much gone by the 1980s. But nevertheless, Bad Company was a very good band. And I remember when this album came out, it was a huge rage. I was in high school. I was a freshman in high school. And I went to high school, and all the guys were wearing the black T-shirt that said Bad Company. I still have one. It doesn't fit very well, but it just said white Bad Company emblazoned across the front. And, of course, everybody, all the guys were wearing them, and the girls were wearing them. And, a lot of heavy rock bands never had a lot of female friends, tend to be more male heavy, but Bad Company was exceptional. They had both. A lot of women liked it, a lot of men liked it, and it was just great, straight up rock and roll. And they wrote some really great songs, and they played them extremely well. And of course, Paul Rodgers' voice is, in my opinion, one of the great singers of rock history, especially in the 1970s. You can't diss him. He is absolutely fantastic singer. He had put so much emotion and feeling into his singing, like a Robert Plant almost. He didn't have the piercing clarity of Robert Plant, but he had this sort of earthy tone to him that was very clear, very powerful, very emotional. And that would be Paul Rodgers, this exceptional singer who could really bring emotion and feeling to his music. And it should be regarded as one of the top singers of the 1970s and maybe of all time. All right, so we have these four guys. They formed a band in England, and they recorded this album at Headley Grange, the same place where Led Zeppelin recorded their albums, especially Led Zeppelin 4. And they were on the Swan Song label. Now, Swan Song label was a label created by Led Zeppelin, and so this was the first band, Bad Company, on the Swan Song label. And so here you go. This was Led Zeppelin was actually helping was providing a label for new bands, and Bad Company was the first band to be on their label. Now, this is old time rock and roll as far as my day. It doesn't sound heavily layered with a lot of studio effects and a lot of interesting layerings and stuff done in the studio, like a lot of bands came along in the 70s and 80s. These guys sounded very clean. They sounded like early rock and roll, late 60s, early 70s rock and roll, because that's the period they belong in. And very just straight up rock and roll. You can't call it anything else. And the first song is a classic called Can't Get Enough. When you hear it, you're going to hear a nice, clean rock song, but it's catchy. And this stuff got a lot of radio airplay It was really, really great music. So we're going to start listening to Bad Company's first debut album, and the first song is Can't Get Enough. So here we go right now. Pause it for a second here. You notice that bump, 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 bump. That was the boogie woogie, boogie. It's called boogie woogie, okay? Boogie woogie rhythm that was still used a lot in 1970s rock and roll. And you'll hear a lot of the early 70s rock bands. Foghat did a lot of this stuff. Bad Company, a lot of bands put this boogie woogie beat in there. Now, by the 1980s, that was all gone. It was all just 4-on-floor, solid, straight 4 count. But this boogie woogie beat is a hallmark of early first half of the decade 70s rock music. And that's almost how you can date it, because you know, aha, that's where they're from. But it had a sensuality to it and a feel to it that just give it more interest than just a dun 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 dun, a straight 4/4 beat. And let's continue. You know, folks, there's only one thing that Mark and I like almost as much as drumming, and that is good coffee. And so here at Rock My Bean, we have put together 5 of our favorite coffees from around the world that are roasted fresh on order and mailed to you right away. If you're interested in helping autism awareness, every purchase of this coffee, a percentage goes to the National Autistic Association to help autistic parents, help young people, help autistic adults. And we take this very seriously. Now, we have put together these 5 flavors. Each one is named after a specific drum from a specific part of the world. And we'll be expanding this line of coffees as we go. But these 5 are our favorites, and we want to share them with you. So if you're interested in drumming and coffee and helping with autistic awareness, please visit us at brainygourmet.com. Click on the Rock My Bean link, and happy coffee drinking. Woo, there we go, folks. That was Bad Company's debut song on their debut album, Can't Get Enough. And we couldn't get enough of Bad Company when they came out with this. It was like, wow, these guys are great. These guys are just badass rock and roll, you know. No fancy stuff, no fancy sound effects, just bass, guitar, great singing, and some great drums by Simon Kirke. Simon Kirke's drumming is very good. And one thing I like about Simon Kirke's drumming is he's very clean. He isn't crashing cymbals everywhere. He's just carrying a really good rhythm section that and he picks just the right fills at just the right time and doesn't like the way he doesn't repeat the same thing over and over again so you get tired of it. He's doing his fills and little runs a little differently, and not a lot of runs. Really, not a lot of runs. A lot of little fills here and there, a lot of snare work, and he's very spare on the cymbals, which I like. He uses the cymbals when he needs to use them. That's what John Bonham did, and actually Phil Rudd from AC/DC later on did the same thing. Played a very sparing drum part with cymbals, very clean, very rhythm-based, backing that rhythm section, keeping it interesting, but keeping the direction of the rhythm steady. And Simon Kirke was very good at that. And of course, Mick Ralph's guitar playing, he had such great little riffs, great phrases on his guitar. It was a very traditional sounding guitar, nothing revolutionary, wasn't any new sounds or new effects, but it was a solid rock electric guitar for that period of time. And obviously, when you get into the 80s, you expect more, all these whammy bars and stuff, but he didn't have that. He just played great straight guitar, and the whole band really was just a great rock band. It wasn't anything flashy about them, but it was solid boogie-woogie, blues-based rock and roll, and if that's what you wanted, that's what these guys gave you. Okay, the next song is Rock Steady, which is a great song on the album, one of my favorites, and according about every bio on this band, this particular song and the band name Bad Company was originally acclaimed, was a Western starring Jeff Bridges. And everybody thought that's where they got the name, but they didn't. But that's where they thought they got the name. Both lead singer Paul Rodgers and Simon Kirke, the drummer, both of Free, formed this band with Mick Ralphs of Mott the Hoople, and Ralph brought in 3 songs from Mott the Hoople, Ready for Love, Moving On, and Can't Get Enough. And Rodgers and Kirke wrote the song Bad Company and decided to use it as the band name. So anyway, this is how that happened. So they brought a lot of stuff from their previous bands and brought it to Bad Company and put it in this album. Simon Kirke and Paul Rodgers are credited for being the writers on this song. And according to Kirke, it was actually written in about 10 minutes. It's funny how many great songs are written as an afterthought or in 5 or 10 minutes. He said, this is what Simon Kirke says, when Bad Company was first formed, we had a period of time when we were only 3 real solid members. And it was 5 and 6 months before we actually got a bass player. So we had Bad Company as a working title. It was just a working title, a placemaker for what they might have a real name later. It wasn't cast in stone, and that was going to be the name. So Paul was playing around the piano, came up with these 3 chords, and we took it away. So the album was recorded, like I said, at Headley Grange, the studio in England, where both where Physical Graffiti and Led Zeppelin 4 were recorded. And anyway, Rogers told a Spinner magazine that they wrote this song with a Western feel, almost a biblical promised land kind of lawless feel to it. So there you go. And this song is Rock Steady. So here we go with the next song on the album, Rock Steady. And now. Cowbell. Pause there for a second. I've talked about this with John Bonham before, but I haven't mentioned anybody else. But John Bonham was very good at holding that timing back on the drum hits. He kept it a fraction of a second behind the rhythm, so it gave a heaviness to it. It gave a steadiness to it, a solidity to it. And he did, because bands tend to want to race, especially live shows. And so Bonham was just great at doing that. You could hear it. He would come in just a fraction of a second late on that cymbal crash or that backbeat. Simon Kirke did the same thing, and you can hear it very clearly. And he was really good at dun, 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 dun. He held back the horses from wanting to get away, and it kept that solid rhythm and tempo that it was easily accessible by people, and they could really feel the rhythm. It didn't get lost in speed. And it's one thing that's missing from bands, a lot of bands later on in the century, is that they didn't have that solidity rhythm section. But Simon Kirke was just as good as John Bonham at doing that, and his drum parts are not complicated. They're not full of flash, but they're solid, really respectable drumming parts that I always liked. And as a drummer, I tried to emulate when I was creating drum parts because I wanted to have that nice, solid, heavy, dependable rhythm, that backbeat that the band needed. Okay, here we go with the rest.
Rock, rock steady now. When my love, gets a little bit too heavy. Rock steady. She's mine, and I got to get ready. Yeah. Close my eyes and I let myself go. I listen to, and I let the music flow. Yeah, it's flowing. Turn on your light and stay with me while and ease your worried mind. Turn on your light and stay with me while and rock steady. Oh yeah, oh yeah, yeah,
Hit that cymbal. Everything.
Turn on your light and stay with me while and ease your worried mind.
we go. Rock steady. Okay, we are just about done with the first few songs off this album, and it's incredible. It's a great album. If you want to listen to classic rock in its classic form, before a lot of technology came in to change it, to add to it, to do things to it that some people really don't like the production values of the 80s. I tend to like it, certain aspects of it, but this was very clean rock and roll. Nothing fancy, just in your face, no unapologetic rock music. Okay, the next song is Ready for Love, another Mott the Hoople song that was brought into the band and they put on this record. It was written by guitarist Mick Ralphs, and he also sang on the lead on the track. Now, when Mott the Hoople split up, he brought the song to his new group, Bad Company, because it had been rejected by for the album for Mott the Hoople. And they put it on their first album, which is this one. And this time, the lead vocalist, Paul Rodgers, was singing the lead. And this album took off. It went to #1 in a number of territories. And thanks to large part to other songs Ralphs brought to the group that were not recorded by Mott the Hoople, like Can't Get Enough and Moving On, Bad Company versions of Ready for Love became even more popular than the original with Mott the Hoople. So this is a great song. Bad Company wasn't a fast rock band. They played a nice, solid, steady rock beat. And they were unapologetic about it, but it's sort of an artifact of that period in time. So Bad Company fits in that 1970s, early 70s rock pantheon, and with Led Zeppelin and, of course, Free, naturally, and a lot of other bands as well. They all come from that period, and they have this just clear rock sound. All right, the next one is Ready for Love. And let's do it. Ready for Love. Here we go now.
Walking down this rocky road, wondering where my life is leading, rolling on to the bitter end, finding out along the way what it takes to keep love living. You should know how it feels, my friend. I want
get a ton of piano with Bad Company. This is an unusual time to get it. But it works. It works great here.
I want you to stay.
Pause it right here. One thing about Bad Company is because they didn't have a lot of stuff going on, they had to be very tight. And it was a very tight band. You can tell. It actually, as a drummer and being in bands, this sounds like a few guys getting together in the basement or wherever and playing. No fancy gadgetry, no studio trickery, no special effects, no weird, 20-foot pedals or electric drums, whatever. Just simple, clean rock music with the buds down, in your basement studio, whatever it is, playing some rock, playing some music, and some of it is light like this and melodic. And you don't get that anymore. And even in the late 70s, it kind of disappeared. You got a lot of special effects. You got Boston and all his effects wizardry, and then Eddie Van Halen and etc. But this is very clean rock and roll, very simple rock and roll. But it's not easy. And if you want to be in a rock band and play this, you've got to be a tight musician. You got to know how to put in interesting fills, interesting chops, and keep it clean. And there's one thing about this is it was very, very clean. And of course, the voice of Paul Rodgers is very sensual. And this is the kind of music, I want to add this too. This is the kind of music you could put on date night. Now, not every song was appropriate. She might, they put this on and it's going to give you maybe the wrong impression, or maybe the right impression. But generally, Bad Company's music was something you could put on date night, okay? It wasn't going to be over the top. It wasn't going to be, too hard, too crunchy. It was very simple and good rock music. And like I said, both genders liked Bad Company. You had an even number of men and women who tend to like this music. All right, let's continue on with Ready for Love.
Want you to dance. I'm ready for love. Oh, baby, I'm ready for love. Ready for love. Oh, baby, I'm ready for love. Ready for love. Oh, baby, I'm ready for love. Ready for love. Oh, baby, I'm ready for your I'm ready for your love.
Nice fade out, nice fade out. Nice fade out. Very good. Okay, Ready for Love. Like I said, very clean rock and roll. Nothing over the top. Just straight up rock and roll. And this was a much more laid back song. The meaning of the song is obvious. I don't need to describe that to you, but I think you get it. But like I said, it was a very accessible music to both men and women. And they had some great hard hitters, but they had some great, nice melodic songs like this too. And you could hear the bass, and you could hear the guitar, and then throw a little piano in there. The drum was always just holding back a little on that tempo. Simon Kirke was just as good as John Bonham in doing this, just as good. And it really did help the song, gave it that a heaviness to it if it needed a heaviness to it, which it did. So, well, here we are. We are in the middle of Bad Company's debut album, Bad Company. Came out in 1974. And we're going to continue on. We've got more songs coming. We go Don't Let Me Down. We've got Bad Company, the song Bad Company, which is, a lot of these songs have sort of a smoky Western feel to them. You notice that? I do. I always think of sort of a song from a Western. A lot of these songs have that feeling. The next one will be This Way I Choose. And on. We're going to have Moving On, which is a great song. And, of course, Seagull. So there's a ton of great music on this album. I hope you'll join me for the rest of it. Please avail yourself of other albums that we've reviewed. We've got Boston's debut album. We've got Rush 2112, the side A. Oh my gosh, we did Dark Side of the Moon by Pink Floyd, Rumors by Fleetwood Mac, and it goes on and on. We're going to cover all the great albums of the 1970s and 1980s. And this tied in a poll with Van Halen's first debut album. So we're doing them both. And we're going to do another poll here down the road. And I invite you all to join. We're getting more people involved in the polls, which is great because then you're telling me what you want to hear. And the losers of those polls are not losers, but they will be brought into the next poll. And we'll add a couple more songs to that list. And then you can vote for those. We're going to cover all the great rock albums of the 1970s and 1980s. And we're moving nicely through the 70s now. You're getting a good taste, good selection of what was done and the sounds of that decade. Arguably the greatest rock and roll decade ever, at least in my opinion, maybe the opinion of others, perhaps you. And if you were my age, you remember all the memories that comes with this music and what things were like and the life we lived and the things that happened to us back then and, you know, how important this music was to us, our generation. And if you're young, I'm giving you the gift of some of the best rock music out there. It needs to be rediscovered because it's still great music. Despite what the record companies have done to rock music over the decades, it's still top of the mountain music. Well, thank you for joining me. And as always, I'll see you again next time. Keep rocking on.